So, the gripping image is exactly this. King Charles resolutely walks into a highly private, highly restricted palace meeting, deliberately drops a heavily sealed red folder, directable fact that it was delivered in exactly this dramatic way, in this highly specific restricted setting, tells you infinitely more about what is actually, terrifyingly happening deep inside the palace than absolutely any sanitized official PR statement ever possibly could. Before we dive deep into the granular details of this unprecedented moment, if you are genuinely into royal updates that actually rigorously break down exactly what is being said versus what is really, strategically going on behind the heavy palace gates, please hit subscribe to my channel. We are meticulously covering this massive story exactly as it develops, and the leaked details slowly coming out of this specific meeting are genuinely, deeply strange and unsettling. So, here is exactly where the narrative gets incredibly weird and highly contradictory. The sprawling palace PR machine has spent the last 2 grueling years incredibly carefully managing the public narrative surrounding King Charles's fragile health. Since February 2024, when they initially, shockingly confirmed he was battling cancer, absolutely every single public update has been meticulously, exhaustively filtered through thick layers of carefully chosen, focus-grouped language, explicitly designed to sound highly reassuring to the public markets and the Commonwealth, without ever actually legally promising anything concrete about his prognosis. They repeatedly, vaguely said he was undergoing treatment. They enthusiastically said he was continuing his state duties. They optimistically said he was responding well, but they absolutely never ever used the word remission. They absolutely never used the word recovery. And in December 2025, when Charles himself publicly announced he would be circulated a polite agenda beforehand, absolutely no one was told what the meeting was about or how long it would last. The specific people urgently folded directly in front of William, sat down heavily in his chair, folded his hands tightly together, and simply waited in silence. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room reportedly lasted only a few agonizing seconds before William finally broke the seal and opened the folder. But, according to terrified insiders present, those few seconds felt incredibly deliberate and heavy. Charles desperately wanted absolutely everyone in that room to fully, viscerally understand the immense, crushing weight of exactly what was about to happen. And exactly what happened was the undeniable confirmation of a specific coronation date, November 14th, 2026. King Charles's birthday, the exact same date he was born at Buckingham Palace back in 1948. Setting a massive state coronation on the reigning living monarch's birthday isn't just a poetic symbolic gesture. It is a blaring, undeniable signal that this massive transition, which explicitly means there is a hard biological timeline. And massive timelines in the royal family only ever get confirmed when there is absolute, terrifying certainty about the medical conditions that necessitate them. Now, here is exactly where the story gets significantly more emotionally complicated. Reports say Catherine was completely, utterly speechless. Absolutely not surprised exactly, because she is highly intelligent, but profoundly overwhelmed by the reality. She and William had obviously clearly discussed the grim possibility of succession planning in private, but actually hearing a hard, confirmed date from the king is vastly different from discussing a distant hypothetical possibility. And William reportedly looked at the date, then looked up and asked his father exactly one piercing question: why now? That is the specific part of this story that sticks with me relentlessly. Why now? Because if the optimistic, glossy health updates we've been constantly fed were fully, medically accurate, if Charles really was successfully, happily moving into a stable, manageable, preventative phase, if the palace's sunny public narrative actually matched the grim private reality, then exactly why on earth would a massive coronation date need to be confirmed in this incredibly dramatic final manner? Why the sealed red folder? Why the sudden, protocol-breaking emergency meeting? Why the heavy, dramatic silence? The palace's optimistic public story and these highly dramatic private actions simply do not align in any logical way. That is the massive, glaring contradiction. On one hand, we are constantly, soothingly told the king is successfully managing his condition and energetically continuing his important state work. On the other hand, we are witnessing a sudden, highly dramatic, undeniably final confirmation of Prince William's coronation date, delivered in a specific way that screams absolute urgency and finality. Those two conflicting realities absolutely cannot both be fully true. Either the public medical updates have been wildly, irresponsibly overly optimistic, or the highly private planning is being unnecessarily, theatrically dramatic. Given absolutely everything we intimately know about exactly how carefully the palace desperately controls negative information, the infinitely more likely explanation is that the grim private reality is significantly further along the timeline than the sunny public narrative suggests. And this absolutely isn't just wild speculation from random, uninformed internet commentators. Robert Jobson, a highly respected veteran royal reporter possessing a long, proven track record of incredibly reliable, highly placed sources, has bluntly stated that Charles is absolutely not making a full recovery. He explicitly said Charles is handling it. That is a massive, crucial medical distinction. Handling something means desperately managing painful symptoms, carefully managing rapidly depleting energy, and strategically managing brief public appearances. It absolutely does not mean the underlying aggressive condition is gone or cured. Jobson also astutely noted that the panicked palace placed entirely too much desperate emphasis on positive news in their vague public updates. That is absolutely not a harsh criticism of Charles personally as a man. It is a highly critical observation about exactly how the terrified institution attempts to manage bad information to prevent panic. And when you aggressively combine that observation with rampant reports that the king's own PR team actively begged journalists to significantly minimize the severity of his condition right before the vague December announcement, you rapidly start to see a highly coordinated pattern of deception. The palace has been actively using language that sounds incredibly reassuring without ever making definitive, binding medical claims. Preventative phase undeniably sounds infinitely better to the public than ongoing aggressive treatment. Regularly evaluated undeniably sounds significantly better than we honestly don't know if this is working. But absolutely none of those carefully focus-grouped phrases actually mean what the hopeful public desperately hoped they meant. And the undeniable fact that Charles reportedly flatly declined to significantly reduce his grueling schedule, despite massive growing concerns from his own medical team and Queen Camilla, tells you absolutely everything you need to know about his internal mindset. He deeply knows that his time is highly limited. He is actively choosing to stubbornly spend what little time he has working for the crown. That is his personal, stoic decision. But it also perfectly explains exactly why the massive succession planning has suddenly, drastically accelerated behind closed doors. Now, let's talk specifically about William's crucial role in all of this maneuvering. Long before this highly dramatic meeting even happened, William had reportedly already been holding highly secret, intense gatherings in London to discuss the impending future of the monarchy. These absolutely weren't officially scheduled, public-facing events recorded in the court circular. They were highly private, intense conversations with senior establishment figures about exactly how his reign would functionally operate, exactly what his coronation would visually look like, and exactly what kind of modern institution he actively wanted to lead. According to Rob Shooter's detailed reporting, these secret meetings were highly significant. William absolutely wasn't passively waiting for permission from his father to start planning. He was already aggressively acting. Some palace insiders have even begun referring to him in whispers as a shadow king, which undeniably sounds incredibly dramatic, but when you critically look at his actual recent behavior and power grabs, it's absolutely not an inaccurate description. While Charles was understandably focused heavily on brief, exhausting public appearances and draining state visits, William was reportedly quietly handling massive decisions about internal palace policy, staff restructuring, and long-term institutional strategy. He is 43 years old. He has spent his entire highly scrutinized adult life exhaustingly preparing for this exact role, and the undeniable fact that he is already actively making massive structural decisions about exactly how the monarchy will operate under his future leadership tells you clearly that he is absolutely not waiting for the formal, sad transition to occur. He is already fully in motion. Catherine's intense involvement in this process is also highly notable. Reliable reports indicate she has been incredibly actively involved in preparing for William's future coronation, working incredibly closely with senior advisors to ensure absolutely everything is ready significantly early. That absolutely is not just picking out ceremonial music or dresses. That is hard, practical, logistical planning, and it aligns perfectly with the broader, observable pattern of King Charles actively working to massively increase her public profile in clear preparation for a rapid potential handover. The massive, unprecedented 5-year royal duty schedule assigned specifically to William and Kate earlier this year was widely, correctly interpreted by many analysts as a glaring signal that the palace fully expects the transition to happen significantly sooner than publicly acknowledged. Why on earth would you aggressively secure a massive 5-year commitment if you genuinely didn't think the roles would be drastically changing within that specific, short period? So, you have absolutely all of these massive pieces violently moving at once. The king's health situation is undeniably significantly more serious than the sanitized public narrative suggests. William is already aggressively, actively planning the logistics of his reign. Catherine is deeply, practically involved in the massive preparation. A highly specific coronation date has been formally confirmed, and the exact, dramatic way it was delivered, in a sealed red folder with absolutely no verbal explanation, strongly suggests that Charles desperately wanted the massive moment to carry immense, terrifying weight entirely without him having to say the incredibly hard, sad part out loud to his family. When William asked why now, Charles absolutely didn't answer him. He simply looked down at his hands in silence. According to one insider in the room, that heavy silence was infinitely louder than any words could have been. That is absolutely not a man who has a reassuring, comforting medical explanation ready. That is a man who intimately knows the terrible answer, but simply doesn't want to say it to his son. And in this incredibly tense context, the answer is undoubtedly exactly what absolutely everyone in the room already deeply suspected. The biological timeline is significantly shorter than absolutely anyone wanted to admit. Now, there is another incredibly complex layer to this transition that is highly worth examining. William is absolutely not just inheriting a shiny crown. He is inheriting a massive, toxic set of completely unresolved family problems that have been actively festering and damaging the brand for years. Prince Andrew and Prince Harry represent two very different, highly publicized situations, but both of them represent massive, ongoing challenges that Charles has completely struggled to handle definitively or cleanly. With Andrew, the toxic issue was incredibly clear to the public. His disastrous association with Jeffrey Epstein, his humiliating removal from active public duties, the embarrassing loss of his prestigious military titles. Charles has certainly taken necessary steps, but according to highly placed palace sources, there has been significant, ongoing internal pressure to go significantly further. Many people within the establishment desperately want Andrew completely, legally removed from the line of succession entirely, and formally, permanently separated from the monarchy. William has reportedly been the absolute strongest, most aggressive advocate for this uncompromising position. He firmly believes Andrew should have been fully, completely cut off years ago, but Charles has stubbornly hesitated. Charles is constantly, agonizingly balancing the cold responsibilities of being king with the messy reality of being Andrew's older, protective brother. And according to one top palace source, Charles has struggled immensely with this conflict. He is deeply concerned about Andrew's fragile feelings in a way that significantly complicates the necessary, cold, institutional decision. William has absolutely no such hesitation. He is absolutely not Andrew's brother. He is his frustrated nephew, and his absolute, overriding priority is the survival and reputation of the monarchy itself. Once William becomes king, the widespread expectation is that he will immediately make the ruthless, final decisions Charles simply couldn't bring himself to make. That is absolutely not necessarily a criticism of Charles's humanity. It's a stark observation about exactly how messy family dynamics negatively affect strong leadership. But it definitively means the monarchy will operate incredibly differently and much more ruthlessly under William. With Harry, the situation is infinitely more emotionally complicated and painful. The relationship has been deeply, publicly strained for years. The explosive Oprah interview, the damaging Netflix documentary, the brutal memoir. Spare. William has coldly made peace with the total estrangement in his own rigid way. He is absolutely not interested in any form of messy, highly publicized public reconciliation that could easily reopen old, painful wounds and generate more headlines. And the reports from earlier this year powerfully reinforced that stance. When Charles held a highly secretive meeting with Harry and his family at Highgrove in July, William was reportedly completely blindsided by the news. He absolutely didn't know the meeting was even happening. He firmly thought his father was busy in London working on state matters. Instead, Charles was quietly having a highly private, emotional family gathering that William absolutely wasn't consulted about or informed of. That kind of communication breakdown matters immensely. If you are actively preparing to take over the massive machinery of the monarchy, you absolutely need to know exactly what is happening within your own highly volatile family. And the undeniable fact that William was caught completely off guard strongly suggests that Charles is still making highly personal, emotional decisions that have massive institutional implications entirely without fully briefing his designated successor. That is a massive operational problem, not simply because William needs to arrogantly control absolutely everything, but because a smooth transition strictly requires flawless coordination, and seamless coordination strictly requires accurate, timely information. So, when you critically look at the entire, massive picture, the sealed red folder, the explicitly confirmed date, the highly secret planning meetings, the completely unresolved, toxic family issues, the heavily managed health situation, you rapidly start to see a monarchy deeply in the final, frantic stages of a massive transition that has been entirely forced by tragic medical circumstance rather than planned choice. Charles absolutely didn't plan to step back this incredibly early. He has literally been waiting his entire, incredibly long life to be king, but the brutal reality of his failing health has violently forced an entirely different, highly accelerated timeline. And now he is desperately doing exactly what he can to ensure the massive handover is as smooth and stable as possible. The burning question is whether the British public will ever be told the full, honest truth before the actual transition happens. Because right now, the specific story we are being fed is highly, carefully edited. We get positive, flowery language, vague, meaningless assurances, and absolutely no definitive medical answers. But the actual physical actions behind the scenes tell a completely different, terrifying story. Sealed red folders slammed on tables, sudden emergency meetings, explicitly confirmed coronation dates, those are absolutely not the relaxed actions of a comfortable monarchy that confidently expects things to simply continue exactly as they have been for years. Those are the highly frantic, focused actions of a massive monarchy urgently preparing for monumental, unavoidable change. And that massive change is coming significantly sooner than most people realize. The date is firmly set, November 14th, 2026. King Charles's birthday, the exact day his eldest son will be formally crowned. The deep symbolism is absolutely impossible to ignore. A king who spent his entire, long life waiting patiently for the throne will watch his heir actively take it on the exact anniversary of his own birth. That absolutely isn't just a standard succession. That is a highly choreographed handover, explicitly designed to carry immense poetic meaning. The room currently knows, the senior advisors know, even Catherine knows, and incredibly soon, the public will inevitably know too. The thick palace walls are silent, but absolutely everything inside them is moving at breakneck speed. And when the official, somber announcement finally comes, It absolutely won't be a surprise to anyone who has actually been paying critical attention. It will merely be a sad confirmation of exactly what that sealed red folder already made abundantly clear. The ancient monarchy is changing, and William is fully ready. Whether the rest of us are fully prepared for it is another question entirely, but let's deeply pause on that specific question for a moment, because it's significantly bigger than it initially sounds. The British public has spent 70 long years comfortably living under exactly one queen. Elizabeth was the ultimate constant. She was the unshakable reference point for the nation, and even long after her death, the monarchy still heavily carried the immense weight of her legacy. Charles inherited that massive weight, but he also inherited a rigid institution that had been entirely shaped around a completely different kind of incredibly long reign. His entire brief kingship has essentially been entirely about managing transition, whether people actively wanted to admit it or not, and now that transition is rapidly becoming formal and final. What's truly fascinating is exactly how incredibly little the general public actually knows about the immense, complex mechanics of this process. We generally think of coronations as massive, glittering public spectacles, and they certainly are, but the incredibly complex logistical planning actually starts years in advance in highly secure rooms exactly like the one Charles walked into with that red folder. There are massive, sprawling committees, there are ancient, rigid protocols, there are incredibly complex legal documents, there are intense discussions about exactly which world leaders will attend, exactly how the massive ceremony will be globally broadcast, exactly what specific role the Commonwealth will play, and exactly how the highly sensitive religious elements will be carefully handled. Absolutely none of that gets decided quickly, and absolutely none of it gets decided in public. So, when we hear that a specific date has been firmly confirmed, exactly what we are really hearing is that the entire, massive machinery of the monarchy has already been forcefully set in motion. The formal invitations haven't gone out yet, the pub's actively underway. That is exactly what the sealed folder truly represented. Absolutely not just a date on a calendar, but the aggressive activation of a massive process that has been waiting patiently in the wings for years. And there is something else highly worth noting here. The specific choice of November 14th absolutely isn't just symbolic because it is Charles's birthday. It is profoundly symbolic because of exactly what it says about Charles's own complex relationship to his brief reign. He spent decades as the absolute longest-serving heir apparent in British history. He waited significantly longer than absolutely anyone. And now, when he finally briefly has the ultimate role he waited his entire life for, he is being brutally forced to actively plan its end. Choosing his own birthday as the exact date of his son's coronation is a poignant way of silently saying that his own complicated legacy and William's bright future are inextricably connected. It is a highly poetic way of making the tragic transition feel slightly less like an abrupt ending and significantly more like a seamless continuation. But it is also a harsh, brutal reminder that Charles's brief time as king will ultimately be defined almost entirely by this single, massive act of handing over power. Think deeply about that for a second. Charles's entire, incredibly long life has been meticulously building toward being king, and now the absolute most significant, memorable thing he may actually do as king is orchestrate the exact moment when he stops being king. That is an incredibly strange, deeply tragic position to be in. It is absolutely not what he wanted, it is absolutely not what anyone expected, but it is the harsh, unavoidable medical reality of the situation, and that reality has massive implications for the institution itself. The monarchy is absolutely not just a dysfunctional family business. It is a massive constitutional institution. It is deeply, inextricably woven into the complex legal and political fabric of the United Kingdom and the entire Commonwealth. A change of monarch absolutely isn't just a pretty ceremonial event. It automatically triggers a whole massive series of complex constitutional processes. New stamps must be printed, new currency must be minted, new oaths must be sworn, new titles must be legally bestowed. The national anthem changes. The specific prayers in churches change, the legal references in courts change, Absolutely all of that takes immense time and coordination to prepare, and absolutely all of it is actively happening right now, incredibly quietly behind the scenes. So, when we talk about the transition being significantly sooner than expected, we absolutely are not just talking about a specific date circled on a calendar. We are talking about a massive, fundamental shift in the exact way the entire country legally operates, and the undeniable fact that this is being prepared so incredibly far in advance clearly tells you that the terrified palace is desperately trying to avoid chaos. They desperately want the massive handover to be perfectly seamless. They desperately want the public to wake up one day and feel like absolutely nothing has changed, even though absolutely everything has changed. That is the ultimate goal. That is the grand strategy. And it is an incredibly delicate one because the more you aggressively prepare in absolute secret, the significantly harder it is to effectively control the narrative when the messy truth inevitably starts to leak. And the messy truth is already leaking heavily. The numerous reports about the secret meeting, the reports about William's private strategy gatherings, the continuous grim reports about the king's true health. Absolutely none of this is accidental. Highly sensitive information moves through the palace in highly specific, calculated ways. It reaches specific, trusted journalists. It shapes highly specific, desired stories. The public narrative is actively being adjusted in real time, even if the official rigid statements haven't caught up to the reality yet. And that is exactly what makes this historical moment so endlessly fascinating. We are actively watching the massive gap between the sunny public story and the grim private reality finally start to close. It absolutely isn't closed yet. There is certainly still a lot we don't know for certain, but the outlines are becoming glaringly clearer. The ultimate direction is becoming undeniably obvious. The absolute only question left is exactly how much time actually remains before the official, sad confirmation. Some reports suggest the announcement could come within mere months. Others suggest it won't come until significantly closer to the date itself. But the undeniable fact that a date has already been firmly set means the massive decision has undeniably been made. The absolute only thing left is the strategic timing of the announcement. And that timing will absolutely be dictated by a complex combination of factors: the king's declining health, the unpredictable political calendar, the fickle public mood, and the palace's cold assessment of exactly when the devastating news will cause the absolute least disruption to the markets. But here is the undeniable thing about timing. You absolutely cannot control it forever. Eventually, the brutal truth comes out. Eventually, the public finds out. And when they do, they will look back at strange, telling moments exactly like this one: the sealed red folder, the heavy silence, the unanswered questions, and they will completely understand exactly what it all truly meant. They will clearly see the pattern, they will see the massive preparation, they will see the tragic inevitability, and they will also undeniably see something else. They will see a king who faced the absolute hardest, most terrifying moment of his life with immense dignity. Not by giving loud, defiant speeches or making grand public announcements, but by simply sitting quietly in a room with his family and handing his eldest son a folder. That is absolutely not weakness. That is immense strength. That is profound acceptance. That is true leadership. Because leadership absolutely isn't always about aggressively holding on to power. Sometimes, true leadership is about intimately knowing exactly when to gracefully let go. And Charles, despite absolutely everything, seems to deeply understand that. He knows the ancient institution is significantly bigger than him. He knows the future absolutely belongs to William. And he knows that the absolute best thing he can possibly do now is make absolutely sure that future is perfectly ready. So, when November 14th, 2026 finally arrives and the heavy crown is formally placed on William's head, it absolutely won't be a sudden, unexpected event. It will be the highly orchestrated culmination of absolutely everything that has been actively happening in secret rooms, exactly like the one where the red folder was opened. It will be the definitive end of one complex story and the immediate beginning of another. And the heavy, terrible silence that Charles brought into that room will finally be broken by the triumphant sound of an abbey full of people loudly proclaiming a new king. The monarchy will continue. It absolutely always does. But it will continue in an entirely different form, under a significantly different, more ruthless leader, facing a completely different set of modern challenges. And the powerful people who were in that specific room, the ones who silently watched the folder opened, will permanently remember that specific moment as the exact point when absolutely everything changed. Not in public, not in front of flashing cameras, but in absolute private and total silence, with a father simply passing something massive to his son and saying absolutely nothing at all. That is the indelible image. That is the true story. And that is the terrifying truth hiding behind all the carefully worded statements and vague reassurances. The transition is absolutely real, the date is firmly set, and the massive monarchy is already aggressively moving forward, whether the rest of us are fully ready or not.